Alright, hey guys, what's going on? So today is quite special. As you know, the solar eclipse is going to happen in a few days, on Monday to be precise. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the math of solar eclipses, how they're predicted. But we're going to come across something in this video that you probably won't see in other videos on YouTube, which is going a little bit more into advanced general relativity and how we might be able to make sense of solar eclipses and their effects within the context of GR. Okay, we're going to specifically talk about curvature, and we're going to talk about the Weyl tensor and how it plays a role in, say, tidal forces, and how eclipses might have an effect on tides. Okay, so without further ado, let's get straight into the content. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure to go into my Patreon page if you want to support the channel and if you're interested in this kind of material. So let's get into it. So today we are talking about eclipses. This is something that you probably won't find in any general relativity playlist, but it's quite interesting. Eclipses are an interesting phenomenon where there's broadly two different types of them. There's the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. The solar eclipse happens when you have the sun, and you have the earth, and you have the moon. Actually, no, wait, nope. The solar eclipse happens when the moon is between the earth and the sun. And what happens is you get a shadow of the moon on the earth due to the sun. The light beam, the light of the due to the earth, or due to the moon obstructing the sun from your view. So that's the solar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when the earth is between. You have the earth, the moon, and then the sun. And what happens here is that the light of the sun is going to shine on the moon, and what you'll see when you look up at the moon is a red moon. Okay, and that's quite interesting as well. For a long period of history, for at least the past 4,000, 5,000 years, people have used solar eclipses to measure time, to navigate themselves throughout the world. They've used solar eclipses to perform various different types of calculations to prove the Earth was round, to demonstrate the size of the Earth relative to the moon. There's a rich history of solar eclipses that I'm not going to get into because, again, my channel is more science-based. I am interested in this kind of stuff, but I want to sort of stay on topic here and keep us on math and science. I've experienced a solar eclipse before. This was me at in the Painted Hills out in Oregon. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago. There was an eclipse, a total eclipse. Me and my family decided to go to the line of totality and visit that eclipse. And we were also so enthralled with the eclipse that we decided to capture it with our phones attached to telescopes, so that when the moon came across the sun, it would we would see that on our phones. All right, so let's talk about three these that go into the basic math behind how solar eclipses are predicted. So one thing to know, and these are the things that you probably see on YouTube if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But after this, we're going to go a little bit deeper into how eclipses affect tidal forces, and we're going to talk about those in general as well. Right. So what happens here? So the first thing we want to consider is this thing called the synodic month. The synodic month occurs really simply as it's the amount of time it takes to go from new moon to new moon. So you have an initial position of the moon relative to the Earth, and as it traverses its path around the moon, it traverses an ellipse pattern. Here's here's the halfway point, and then it arrives back at its initial point as it traverses this path. Okay. And there's a lot of things that we can do to calculate these paths. We can use Kepler's laws. We can use the laws from Galileo to the physical laws that Galileo used and all the laws that Newton used to actually delineate what these paths are. What I really want to do is just really focus on what the path is right now. Okay, it's the synodic month is the path that the moon takes around the Earth. Okay. Then there's another type of month. So this month here, this month here is about 29.53 days. If you do the calculation, you can do it to a various number of decimal points. But this is approximately what it turns out to be. The an anomalistic month. This goes from pedigree to pedigree. Now this is a little bit different in that it's around 27.55 days. Okay, so it's different from 29 days. And you might think, well, this is a product of the Earth rotating around the Sun, because what happens is that the pedigree actually changes around the Sun. The pedigree is the point, or perigee, sorry, I keep on saying pedigree for genetics. The perigee is the closest point of this path to the Sun, and the apogee is the furthest path away, or not to the Earth. I keep on saying Sun. Closest to the Earth and furthest from the Earth. And what happens is that as the Earth rotates around the Sun, the position of the perigee with respect to its initial position actually will change. And so as you get this rotation of the Earth around the Sun, you get, so that this path here is the path we started at, or the position we started at. Then we go to this position, then we go to this position. If we keep the Earth fixed, what we end up seeing is that the perigee actually changes from position, and it eventually comes back full circle. Right? And so that full circle takes about 27.5 days. And so there's two types of rotations going on here. One is the rotation of the Earth, or the moon around the Earth, and the other is the rotation of the perigee itself, which is a product of the Earth rotating around the Sun. Okay? We want to keep in mind also that all this rotation, the rotation of the moon around the Earth, the rotation of the Earth around the Sun, this is all made possible by Einstein's rules of general relativity, which is something, again, that I have talked about quite in depth in Tensor Calculus playlist, but also most recently in my GR playlist. All this rotation is made possible through the metric tensor and geodesics, and how the metric tensor changes and how vectors change within geodesics on curved surfaces. Okay, and I'm not done with that playlist by any means, but we want to keep in the back of our mind that really at the core of all of this is indeed general relativity, curvature of this a four-dimensional manifold, which is what we call space-time. It's Hausdorff and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to get too much into the details there, but again, the point is, all this rotation, when we're talking about the moon rotating around the Earth rotating around the Sun rotating around some other celestial body, this is all made possible through the discoveries of Einstein and his equations of general relativity. Okay, the last month that we want to look at is the Draconic month. The Draconic month is a node-to-node kind of month. And what happens here, imagine you're standing on Earth, you're looking up at the Sun, okay? And what will happen is that the moon, it'll eventually come to, it's at an angle, right? So the path of the moon is at an angle with respect to the path of the Earth around the Sun. So if we look at this from a side view, here's the Earth, and say the Earth rotates around the Sun like this, okay, and the moon is going to rotate around, we'll make the moon, this black spot, the moon is actually going to rotate around the Earth at an angle, right? And that angle is 5 degrees ish with respect to the rotation of the Earth around the sun. Okay, and what's going to happen is that the moon is going to it's following this path. It's rotating around the Earth. As it's rotating around the Earth, eventually it gets into a point where it obstructs the sun. Okay, and that obstruction of the sun is what we call a solar eclipse. Okay, and so what you have. And so what you would see is a black spot, and this happens every 27.21 days. Okay. All right. So what's going on here? So we have 1 month, the synodic month, which is just the rotation of the moon around the Earth. You have the anomalistic month. This is the rotation of the perigee. And then you have the draconic month, which is a rotation of the moon around the Earth, but at this particular node on that path. So it's not. So one way to think about this is that the draconic month is the month where the moon actually will pass the face of the sun. Okay. All right, so these are all three types of sinusoidal rotations in some sense. And so they have a frequency, okay? The natural question is, at what point do these all match frequencies? At what point do all these rotations sort of resonate with one another, okay? And the idea here is that point at which they all resonate with one another, at what point that they all match each other, is the point at which you would see a total solar eclipse. Okay, and we have the math now, so we can go through this pretty quickly. The idea here is that, okay, so here's our month, our synodic month, our anomalistic month, and our draconic month. Here are those days, and what ends up happening is that for every 223 synodic months, there's about 249 anomalistic months, and for every 223 synodic months, there's around 242 draconic months. So if we multiply these numbers all by these factors, we get roughly the same number, right? Which is around 6,585 days, with some decimal points to the end, right? And the idea here is that we can convert these into days, hours, and minutes. We don't really care that much about the hours and the minutes, but the important thing here is that it's all around 6,585 days, okay? And together, we'll call that 1 saros. So 1 saros is the amount of time or the amount of days it takes for all of these for all of these different months to match with one another. Okay. So what this basically says that in 6,585 days, the synodic month will be complete. The anomalistic month will have completed, and the draconic month will have completed at the end of each one of these time frames here. Okay. So what does this all mean? Well, so if we define 1 saros as 365 days and 8 hours, we're going to say roughly, this is a rough, between all of these here, all of these numbers right here, well, we're going to say that 1 saros is about the median-ish. It's a little bit more on the low side of things. 3,655 8 days, that's around the draconic month, and that's really that's this, right? That's when we would actually see the moon fully envelop the sun. So we're going to say that this is more emblematic of the draconic month, but this is when all of those months sort of match with each other, or all of these different types of months match with each other. So what does this convert into? This converts into 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. Well, in 8 hours, so this isn't going to be the amount of time you would see the eclipse arrive at the exact same spot, right? So say I observed the eclipse now, theoretically in 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, the solar eclipse will happen again, but because of this 8 hours, it travels a third of the amount, it travels a third of the way around the Earth, right? Because one rotation of the Earth is 24 hours, okay? And 8 hours is a third of that. So if we multiply this by 3, essentially, we should get rid of this hours, the amount of hours, and we get the amount of years and the amount of days, right? And we call this the, I might butcher the pronunciation here, but the exeligimus. 1 exeligimus is 3 saros. 3 saros, multiply this all by 3, we get 54 years and 34 days. So if you want the eclipse to show up at the exact same spot, what you'll find is that this is roughly the 54 years and 34 days away. And so that's what we'll be experiencing on Monday, which is why many of these solar eclipses are once-in-a-lifetime things, right? Again, there's lots of different types, a lot of different ones that will occur on different areas of the planet. So it's not like they occur only once every 500 or every 54 days. The idea here is that they are interesting in that if you want them, they show up at the exact same time, or at the exact same place within that amount of time. Okay, and so that's some of the basic math that you'll see on YouTube and elsewhere about solar eclipses. Let's get a little bit more into some interesting GR behind this. So, eclipses will also affect the shape of the Earth, but because the Earth is a solid rock, the thing that actually gets distorted is the water that covers the Earth. So we're starting to get into tidal forces. This is quite interesting. So consider this illustration here. We have the moon, right? So the moon is, you could think of the moon as, it has a gravitational field. There's a gravitational field that permeates all space and time. The moon, because it bends space a little bit, it's going to pull on the gravitational field of the Earth, okay? And so that pulling it manifests itself as an attempted stretching of the Earth, and the only thing that can really stretch that's malleable is the water on the Earth, on the oceans. And so what you get is a tidal effect, right? The tidal effect is the effect of the effective shape of the Earth, including all the water in the oceans. All right. And so if the moon moves to a node, right? So this is one of those nodes. Then you get a pulling in the orthogonal direction. So you have two directions, but at which the tidal forces are acting, right? So you have a horizontal direction and you have a vertical direction. And wherever the moon is, it's going to pull in that direction, okay? Because, again, the gravitational fields are attractive fields, and so it's going to try to pull on, it's going to have an effect, if you will, on anything that's largely malleable on the planet or on the face of the planet. The shape. So this is where we get into a little bit of advanced stuff, but I'm going to try to break it down. The shape of the Earth effectively undergoes a dramatic change in shape when an eclipse happens, because what you can think of is, the sun has a just giant gravitational pull on the Earth, so does the moon, and what happens is that you have Giant gravitational pull plus another gravitational pull. Well, that's a pretty big effect on the tide, right? You can imagine this as being a very drastic effect on the tide. And what happens is a very large stretching, if you will, of the shape of the Earth, right? Again, the only thing that actually changes is the degree of the tides. We can actually calculate this change in the shape using a tensor called the Weyl tensor. Now, I'm not going to get into the derivation. That's going to be for a separate video in this GR playlist. Because it's quite advanced, right? You have to talk about the Kulkarni-Numitsu product. We have to talk about what it means for tensors to have trace and for them to not have trace and all this kind of stuff. But the rough idea here is that there is a tensor out there, or this mathematical object out there that encapsulates what it means to change shape as some object is traveling around some geodesic, okay? And it can be calculated in this way. So this is quite daunting if you've never seen something like this before. But we can break this down, right? So this is the Weyl tensor. This is the Riemann tensor. Riemann, so curvature. That's a curvature tensor. We'll call the Weyl tensor the shape tensor, right? Because it's going to measure shape. Or I'll just call it Weyl. It's named after Hermann Weyl. And then the curvature tensor its full name is the Riemann curvature tensor. It's named after Riemann. And curvature, what's important to know about curvature is that it really fundamentally manifests itself as a force, right? So we can understand this as being a force that acts on the object, and the force is what gives rise to a tidal force. And then there's all this in here. So we have the Ricci tensor, and we have these metric tensors. All these G's, and then we have N. N is the dimension of space. Space-time. R is the Ricci scalar. We've talked about these already. We've talked about this guy. We've talked about this guy. We've talked about this guy. We've talked about this. So we've talked about a lot of this already, right? So I'm really just introducing the Weyl tensor without going through its derivation yet. However, what's important to know here, and I'll go to the next page here, is that in 2 and 3 dimensions, the Weyl tensor actually doesn't exist, right? It does exist, right? It exists, but it gets reduced. I should reword this. The Weyl tensor is interesting. I'll call it is interesting, or I'll just say is equal, right? So is equal to curvature. Right? So it's equal to the curvature, and the reason for that is, well, if the dimension is 2, right? If the dimension is 2, this goes away, right? This is like undefined. Same here. Okay. And so actually what I should say here in just 2 dimensions, right? So in 2 dimensions, the Weyl tensor is equal to the curvature, right? Because this isn't defined, this can't be defined either. So we get just that. So that's quite interesting. So it only really begins to exist in 3 and 4 dimensions. And we'll say 3 dimensions in 3 and 4. Right, so I need to all right. 3 and 4. I don't like my and, so it looks like an 8. 3 and and 4. I'll just say 3 and 4 dimensions. In 4 dimensions, we can calculate how the tides are affected. So this is probably going to be a long video, by the way. Not long as in like an hour, but this is quite interesting, right? So we want to note a few things about this. So in 4 dimensions, we can calculate how the tides how the tides are affected due to this eclipse, right? Or due to some body forcing, or due to what the Earth experiences as it's traveling along some geodesic, okay? So m is, so consider the case in which m is not equal to k, and in which L is not equal to k. Well, what happens is that these metric tensors, a lot of them will cancel out, right? Because metric tensors, they're only non-zero on the diagonal in very simple spherical coordinates, right? And what happens is that all these actually end up canceling, okay? And so the curvature that the Earth feels in space-time is equal to the tidal forces that act on the Earth, right? So the curvature, again, that's the Riemann curvature. We get this. This here is equal to that. All right, that's not super interesting. Again, what's also not super interesting is if m equals L, right? Because then you get more things canceling out. You get, if m equals L, you get this double L here, and you get double L here. But you see we have IL, IL, KL, KL. Well, those things are going to cancel then. Same thing for here. We have KL, KL, IL, and IL, 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 KL, and KL. So these are all going to cancel, right? So what does this mean? This means we have the same effect. Okay, so nothing really changes for these two scenarios. But now, so this means that we're only left with one other option, which is, suppose m equals k, right? Just suppose m equals k, and then we'll see what happens when L equals k. So if m equals k, we keep the circle terms, right? So because this is non-zero, kk, we have kk, and we have kk. Everything else has to go to 0 again because they're off diagonal terms. So off diagonals again are 0 on the metric and 0 on the Riemann on the Riemann scalar, or the Riemann tensor, or sorry, not Riemann, Ricci tensor. So these guys go to 0. Those guys will go to 0, and we keep the circle terms, and we get something that looks like this, and then that can read, so we can take out the minus sign, and we get something that looks like this. In 4 dimensions, we can calculate the effect of an eclipse on the tides, right? Because in 4 dimensions, this is going to be 3, this is going to be 2, so this is going to be 6, and this is going to be 2, right? So this is interesting, right? So we can do the same thing if m was equal, or if L was equal to k. We just preserve these terms that we canceled and get rid of these ones. All right. So so what do we have here? So again, the tidal forces are something that's felt by the Earth, and the tidal forces are something that is induced by the gravitational pull of other objects. And so what we're ending up doing when we're saying m is equal to k and L and all this kind of stuff is that, well, C is the Weyl tensor. I, we said, is going to be the output vector of some object of this can be the output, right? So then the 3 inputs are going to be k, m, and L. The way we can think about this is, well, we've talked about the Riemann tensor. Right, the Riemann tensor, we could say k, m, and L also. When we're talking about the Riemann tensor, suppose we have some field, right, and we're comparing essentially what happens when we travel in the m direction and then in the L direction. And then we compare that with, say, going in the L direction and then in the M direction. So, and then we're holding a vector in some vector space. That vector is our vector k. All right, so this is the vector we're holding. These are the two vectors we're comparing along paths. And we said here that m is equal to k. So m is equal to k. So what does that mean? So m, so this m here and this k we're gonna say are equal. So what ends up happening is we're traveling along the path of the vector that we're trying to compare between point P and point Q. And that so what we end up getting, right, is we're traveling on this manifold. Actually, I'll do it the same way I wrote it here. So we're traveling, we're comparing along. Here's our vector k. We're going along L, and then we're going in the direction k. Right, so k represents is a vector that represents some direction on the manifold. So we're traveling in L, and we're going in the direction that of the vector in the vector space at this point. Okay. So this picture gets reduced down to this picture because we're really only comparing. All we really need is two vectors to feed into this, right? Because again, we said here k and k. So we have that, and then we have our L. We're traveling in some direction L. So we travel in some direction L, and when we get, and we're holding some vector in our hand. Suppose we're holding a vector in our hand. That's the vector space. So we're traveling in some vector L, and then whatever we're holding in our hand, we're then going to travel in that direction, and then we're going to compare the two paths in that way. Okay, so this is how one would sort of put the concept of the eclipse, say, in a broader context regarding GR. What we're going to be doing in the next few videos is we're going to go into the details of the Weyl tensor, but I want to finish some electromagnetic stuff as well. And so with that being said, if you guys like this kind of material, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure to go onto my Patreon page if you want to support the channel. I hope you enjoyed this special on the solar eclipse. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.